Hello, welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is Dick Blakely, and Dick is the CEO of the Blakely Group, which is a portfolio and wealth management firm located in Santa Clara. Fee-only financial planner?
That's correct. We only manage capital and
Okay.
charge a fee on it.
Okay. And Dick has been in the business of advising clients in excess of 36 years. Gee, he started when he was 3 years old. Anyway, anyway, I've known Dick for a long time, a good part of those 36 years. And anyway, actually, when I met him, he was working, I believe, at Smith Barney, although it may have even been Payne Weber
Payne
before
Weber,
that.
yeah.
Then Smith Barney and so forth. But I've always found Dick to be a very sound, have sound advice financially, and so I've always felt that he was a very valuable guest. So Dick, thank you very much for being with me here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. As I understand it, your group's mission statement is to be good investors and help clients have better control over their finances. So this is going to sort of fit into that mission statement today, is to try to help our viewers to be better investors and have better control over their finances, because we're talking about family wealth literacy. So about really families having an educational process for the generations.
That is correct.
Yeah. So Dick, you're known in the community for being a strong advocate for financial literacy. So how did you get involved in that?
Well, thank you, Michael, for inviting me. And let me say, I've got 36 plus years in this industry, in this business, and in here I've worked with hundreds of families, both in the area and throughout the United States. And what I've noticed is there tends to be the generation that raises capital and builds capital, and then whenever they die and they pass on this legacy on, too often it is just lost. And usually, and the numbers tend to say, it's lost within the first 18 months. That's something around 80% of the time. And so with that said, it said is why? That asks the question. And the answer is the next generation was not prepared to receive the money. And so when's the best way to do it? It's much easier, like walking or anything else, when you're younger, when you're smaller. Begin to do that, make your baby steps, then you can grow and be able to handle that money.
Yeah. There's an old expression, I think, and I've read different books about this subject that we're talking about, and it's basically, they said whatever culture that you're in, it's shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, or rice patty to rice patty in 3 generations, or whatever the adaptation is. But basically, it seems like it's hard once family wealth is accumulated to preserve it beyond the 3 generations.
That's correct. It's the builders, the maintainers, and the spenders.
It seems like it. Okay, so it occurs to me that you've thought a lot about this concept of wealth and what it means to different people. You've talked about working with so many different families. Maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, let me sort of begin the answering the question is, what is it about wealth? Well, if you talk with 10 families about wealth, you'll get 10 different answers about wealth. And then if you come back to them a month later, you're probably going to get 8 or 9 different answers than you received the first time, and it's the same people. So why is that? Well, this whole idea and concept of wealth is very, very complex. So wealth is nothing more than the tool. As I sell everything is I call it a resource. The real asset is the family. So how are you going to use the resources to sharpen the family to where it can mean the most over the long term? Now, let me take that problem. As confusing as that is, it's even more confusing in the industry. So what happens there? Well, wealth has become, and I started out as a stockbroker, I become a financial advisor, and then I become a wealth, and so they've confused everything, and what they've used is wealth and wealth management as to become another product. So what is wealth to me? Wealth is that tool to allow the family to become better. And what that further means to me is that we can use wealth to improve our lives and the lives of future generations. I've also found, as we've looked at wealth and the growth of wealth is families need to be able to transfer both to the children and or causes they believe, because if they don't, the government will.
Okay. So all this sounds, pretty good. Sounds interesting. Thoughts about wealth and so forth. What are some practical things to think about all this?
Well, I like to practically look at wealth is nothing more than a string that we're going to have. And so what is wealth? Wealth is the ability to be able to transfer to children, and they be able to do this, and by using that to hopefully make the family ties even stronger. So let me give the practical way what actually happened to me in my life.
Okay.
My parents allowed me to buy a car, as stupid as this may sound, prior to me having a driver's license, but with some conditions, some strings, if you would. First of all, I had to pay for my own insurance. I had to agree to pay for my own gas. I had to agree to pay for the maintenance of the car. I had to agree to keep my GPA up. I had to agree to make sure I call them anytime I'm going to be late. So you can say those are strings. And my parents knew they were strings. But they realized it was more important for me to learn about those strings today and to deal with them versus to tie myself up in a knot in some future year. And with that, what was their purpose? That was to help me to grow financially so that when I did become an adult, I would be able to manage that capital for my future and the future of the other generations.
Okay. So you parents bribed you to do what they wanted you to do?
Yes, you can call it a bribe. I can call it a string. And the whole string was there is to help make me better. The whole string was there in which I was to learn the lessons in which I've used. Well, now that I've turned 61 this month, I have had to use those ever since I was 16. In fact, I think I was 15 at the time that I actually bought the car. So you have to learn to help the children walk before you send them out into the world unprepared.
So how does Dick Blakely define wealth?
I define wealth in 3 different ways. The first is an emotional side. Now, the emotional side is very important, and that ends up is how do I deal with things emotionally? They cannot necessarily be measured and quantified that easily. How can I use it to improve my life and the life of future generations? How can I use it to improve the world? Then along with that, I include the physical as well. I actually tie in with the emotional. I think it was Benjamin Franklin that says, wealth is worth a lot but it's not worth a pittance if you're not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is how I look at wealth. So that is from the emotional side. The second one is what most people traditionally describe wealth. That is financial assets, physical assets. Those are things that can be measured, they can be quantified, and what those end up being is things that we would refer to as personal net worth. Then the final and the third is what I think is generational wealth. Generational wealth is a much higher plane. We can think of Socrates, and how would Socrates has said it? It would says, "How will I be remembered in the hearts and minds of my friends and my family once I am no longer here?" That's the plane that we want to help our families get to, is how will they remembered, and how have they improved the world?
Mm-hmm. Another thing that you fall into there that I think sort of plays in, but I want to be sure to get this phrase in here, has to do with stewardship.
Stewardship is so important, and thank you, Michael, because what we're trying to do is help both our clients and the next generation down of both their children and or sometimes even some of the charities they want to give money to be better stewards so that our life can be well remembered in the future.
Right. My wife and I have been watching some of these public television specials about the manners in England, and the aristocracy that's there. And a lot of people think, oh, these are people of privilege, and they spend money like water and so forth. But what I'm seeing in these is that really the way that they view themselves as the stewards of their families' properties and so forth, and the art and the other thing. In other words, basically, they're living in museums, and so they're preserving it for future generations and sharing it with the public. So I think the stewardship is a great thing, concept to get into, and when we're thinking about wealth, particularly when people have great wealth. It's really what it boils down to is to use it in a responsible way. Do you have any more thoughts related to this idea of wealth, maybe before we move on?
Well, I have good things to be thinking about life and the purpose of life. And so let me paraphrase Ralph Waldo Emerson. And the purpose of life is to be useful, it's to be honorable, it's to be compassionate, and to make sure that there is something that you have left that is of greater good, and to have a life that is well lived. That fits very well with Cara Barker and her book, which is A Life Well Lived. Mm-hmm. That is an important concept. So what is wealth? Wealth gives me the freedom to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, and still make a positive impact in the world, either through myself or my children or the causes I want to support.
Yeah. I was thinking about Emerson. I can't remember the total quote, but one of the things I do remember is he said that one of the things I would want to be is to be admired by little children.
I think that is very good, and it also tells us whether we want to be or not, we're all role models.
Oh, yeah.
And no one's a bigger role model than their parent.
Okay. So from all of this, then you've been conducting, I guess, in your own financial practice, something called family wealth literacy training. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the whole idea of family wealth literacy is I have not met a single person that I believe that was born with a financial wealth management gene. Mm-hmm. So as a result is we learn. And it's, as I had discussed earlier, is you first have to learn to crawl before you be able to do it. So we have a number of steps, and whether it's an adult or it's a child, that we want to walk them through. and we want to be able to teach it. And so with that, the biggest thing is to actually understand wealth and not let wealth drive your life. Life drives your wealth. So that isn't good, and to be able to transfer that to the next generation. That is an important concept. Once we have that, then let's help educate that next generation. Let's have an honest assessment. So let's really think about it. If I'm going to play baseball, or I'm going to play basketball, or I'm going to participate in music, or I'm going to participate in math, or any of the sciences, they're going to have an assessment. So the first thing, let's early on, let's have the assessment of our children. Our next thing is let's have an honest discussion, both with our children, and if we're lucky enough to have our parents alive, let's have that discussion with our parents. Where do they want the family to be able to be taken? What do they want to remember? I remember hearing is one of the important things that you never want to do is embarrass the family name. Mm-hmm. It's a very important concept that we need to be able to do. So with that, then we can now have our discussion, and let's now we have the assessment, and now let's take it back and let's build a practical educational process for the children that is age appropriate. So let's say we have a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old, and he says, I want to own an Xbox. So what do we want to have? Well, what we can do, we can actually have that discussion with the child and just say, okay, let's have this agreement. I'll put a couple $100 in, the Xbox costs $400, and let's say whenever you save, I'll put $2 in for every dollar you save, and then if you get gifts, let's put at least half of the gift of cash that comes into your account, and over the next years, we should be able to help you, and you will have earned the right to own an Xbox. This is part of family literacy. You can do the same thing with a 17-year-old, but the difference ends up being is, let's make it age appropriate, because a 17-year-old does not want to hear what an 8-year-old does.
Okay. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how you help families with this concept of literacy.
Well, let's go back to the white paper that we've talked about in the previous 3 times I've been on the air. Tom, who actually is not healthy now, but had been an independent businessman, has 5 grandchildren. And so I've talked with Tom, and I said, Tom, how did you learn about investing? You're actually pretty good. And so he says, well, I'm a farm boy from out of the Midwest, and I grew up in the 30s, and in the 30s, I lived on the farm with my grandparents and my parents in the same house, and my granddad every night would pull the newspaper, and I'd join him, and we'd read the stock reports, and we'd read the news, and we'd talk about the world, and we'd talk about investing. So as I listened to Tom and I took it back, and I thought, well, first of all, the first big gain was that Tom got was that emotional bond with his grandfather. Number 2, he developed a worldwide view about the world and investing. Number 3, he learned particularly about investing, in his case, a lot about stocks. And finally, he basic really good math skills. So as a result of that, he developed 4 strong skills along with learning how to manage and purchase stocks.
Okay. So maybe you can tell us about some more tips in this area of financial literacy for families.
Sure, I would love to. And the biggest tip that I can say is spend the time, sit down, and the first thing to do is let's understand the goals and the objectives and the priorities with whoever, whether it's ourselves, our parents, or our children. And with that, then the first thing I do with my practice is we write up an investment policy statement, which incorporates the goals, objectives, and the priorities, and which we then make the investments fit those goals, investments, and priorities. From there, we back test it. We actually then write it up and we have what are the risks, what is the matrix, how much downside am I willing to have, and what's the rules for managing that. With that, then both our clients sign it, we have to sign it, in which we are all on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
So let's give an example, and that would be is let's say it's that 7-year-old, that 8-year-old that's looking to buy something. We would first write down what are their goals and objectives. We'd write down the capital and what are the rules. Are they going to be putting it into a money market account? There's no risk, there's no cost. And then we would say, well, where is it going to be held? At a discount brokerage firm or at the bank? You know, is there a cost if they take the money out or close the account? And so we're just helping this child, in this case,
Mm-hmm.
be able to learn to be a good financial manager and questions to ask.
Mm-hmm.
So these are very important. So my tip number one is a best practice. Write your investment policy statement.
Mm-hmm.
That is very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, what are some problem areas when you're trying to go through this process?
Well, that's a very good question, and you brought me back down to reality here. So, you know, let's see. Let me say, 36 years ago, I learned the old adage: Wall Street is a very expensive place to get your education.
Uh-huh.
So, with that, remember that buyer beware.
Mm-hmm.
So, first of all, there's a lot of scams that are out there. Number two is you got to also understand not all people that are writing, that are recommending a stock, they're not always going to be right. Number three, I would tell everyone is to make sure that the investment is going by the way that will help you hit your objectives, and don't pay attention to the flash that's out there that everyone's going to give you that tip. I would also say is not all sales, quote, professionals, end quote, actually know what the heck they're selling you. In fact, many times, you know, they're given a script and they're told, you know, this is what you should buy and this is what you say. And it's been basically tested out in some kind of a test group. So buy what's appropriate for you. And that's where the investment policy statement, it'll keep you on there. And so let the buyer beware.
Okay. So we have about 5 minutes left here, just to let you know where we are.
Sure.
Maybe a little less than 5 minutes. So where should a child and a parent begin in this process?
Well, as I said, let's start with the investment policy statement. And let's write everything up that we should be appropriate for this child.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, then we take the next step. Let's think about investments. I've always believed, and I was told many years ago, that 1 in 10 is a good ratio of opportunities to good investments. Mm-hmm. That may actually be a little high in the opportunities, because you have to kiss a lot of frogs to find that prince.
Okay.
So we look at that. And then number 3, I would suggest along this way would be as what Warren Buffett once said, is if I find one great idea per year, you can become a very wealthy person. So I would say is don't learn to not be in a hurry. Patience will pay off in the long term, because you cannot make money with losses.
Right. I can't make money with losses. Okay. Do you have some suggestions for parents?
biggest suggestion, number one, there's a book by Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families. Take your time, read it, then schedule a retreat with your family and implement what the book says. It will give you a good background. Learn to be in the moment. Get your children to be in the moment.
Okay. So we've probably got about a minute left, Dick. Do you have a final thought that you want to throw out as we conclude here?
Well, let me give you the final thought, and these are all practical and things that we actively do with clients and their children. Is number one is risk management, and number two ends up is coming up and being careful with liabilities. One of my rotations at a bank prior to working at Payne Weber was in retail collections. Mm-hmm. And so I got a chance to deal with young people that got in over their head. Number two is risk management. We actually have a document on this.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I mean, we talk about the income side, but we also have to really talk about this debt management side. And there are so many kids that are getting in trouble, getting way over their heads. We knew somebody that, for example, was using student loans basically for personal living expenses and living in a very high style. And now, I mean, basically they've created a huge hole to dig them way out of.
And I blame financial institutions for some of this. Yeah. When you go to college as a young college student, the first thing that you have is some credit card company trying to push you with a credit card on you.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Dick, thanks so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure having you, and look forward to maybe a meeting again in the not so distant future. Folks, I hope that we've given you, and I know that we have been giving you some valuable things to think about here. Remember, this is going to be posted online. You can find it at financialinsiderweekly.com, and it'll be posted under past episodes, and you may want to tell your friends and family about it. We'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.